This first story comes from Jake, a paramedic with 10 years of experience working for Seattle Fire Department's emergency medical services. Jake has responded to thousands of calls, heart attacks, strokes, overdoses, traumatic injuries. He's seen people in their final moments, and he's brought people back from the edge of death more times than he can count. But one call last November still makes him check his rearview mirror obsessively when he's driving the ambulance. It was 11:47 p.m. on a rainy Tuesday when Jake and his partner Maria received a call for an unresponsive elderly male at a residential address in the Ballard neighborhood. The dispatch notes indicated the patient's wife had found him collapsed in their living room, not breathing, no pulse. Jake was driving. Maria was in the passenger seat preparing equipment. They arrived on scene in 8 minutes, well within the critical window for cardiac arrest survival. The patient was an 82-year-old man named Walter Chun. His wife had already started CPR based on 911 dispatcher instructions. Jake and Maria took over immediately, working through their protocols with the practiced efficiency that comes from years of training. They got a pulse back after the second round of defibrillation. Walter was unconscious but breathing, and his heart was beating on its own. They loaded him onto the gurney and into the ambulance for transport to Harborview Medical Center. Maria stayed in the back with Walter, monitoring his vitals and maintaining his airway. Jake climbed into the driver's seat and started the 12-minute drive to the hospital. About 3 minutes into the transport, Jake heard Maria's voice through the communication system. "Jake, patient is stable. Vitals are holding steady. Copy that." Jake responded, navigating through the wet Seattle streets. But when she looked at the monitor, it was displaying a steady heart rhythm. Not the flat line you'd expect from a disconnected machine, but the regular rhythm of someone sleeping peacefully. Linda checked the leads. They weren't connected to anything. The monitor was receiving a signal, but there was no source. She unplugged the machine from the wall. The rhythm continued, powered by the backup battery that shouldn't have been active. Linda stood there staring at the monitor, watching the steady heartbeat pattern that looked exactly like Mr. Chin's normal sleeping rhythm from the weeks she'd cared for him. Then the call light above the bed turned on. In an empty room, with no patient, the call light was requesting a nurse. Linda's training kicked in. She pressed the call button to respond and said, "This is Linda. How can I help you?" Silence. She tried again. "Hello? This is your nurse. Did you press the call button?" Then, through the intercom, she heard a voice she recognized. Weak, but unmistakably Mr. Chin's voice. "Linda, could you please turn down the lights? They're too bright." Linda felt her blood go cold. She looked around the room. Only the standard overnight lighting was on, the same dim level maintained in all empty rooms. "Mr. Chun," she whispered, "thank you for taking such good care of me." The voice continued through the intercom. "I wanted to make sure you knew. I'm comfortable now. The pain is gone." "Sir, your heart is beating. You're alive. We're getting you help. My heart might be beating, but I'm not in there anymore. I can feel it. I'm here with you now, and I need to make sure Margaret gets my message." Jake desperately wanted to tell Maria what was happening, but he didn't want to sound insane. He decided to focus on driving while trying to process what he was experiencing. "Tell her about the roses," Walter continued. "Every year on our anniversary, I planted a new rose bush in the backyard. There are 57 of them now, one for each year we've been married. She thinks I just liked gardening, but each one was a promise that I'd love her for another year." "I'll tell her," Jake whispered, "and tell her to check the blue box in my workshop. There's a letter in there and a key to a safety deposit box at the bank. I wrote down everything she needs to know. Jake was approaching the hospital now, just a few blocks away. When he glanced in the mirror again, Walter's apparition was fading. "Thank you, young man. You have a kind heart. That's why I could talk to you." Walter's image smiled sadly. "Take care of Margaret for me. She's going to need help with the back step." Jake pulled into the emergency bay at Harborview. As he put the ambulance in park, he heard Maria's voice, now urgent. "Jake, patient is coding. Get back here." Jake rushed to the back of the ambulance. Walter's heart had stopped again. They worked on him for another 20 minutes in the emergency department, but they couldn't bring him back. Walter Chun was pronounced dead at 12:31 a.m. Jake met with Walter's wife, Margaret, after the pronouncement. He told her what her husband had asked him to relay, feeling foolish but compelled to honor the request. Margaret's reaction confirmed that Jake's experience had been real. She broke down crying and explained that Walter had promised to fix their back step 3 years ago, after she tripped on it and sprained her ankle. He'd kept saying he'd get to it, but he never did. It had become a running joke between them. She'd tease him about it, and he'd promised to fix it next weekend. When Jake mentioned the roses, Margaret's eyes widened. "He told you about the roses? I asked him once why he planted so many, and he just said he liked having flowers in the yard. I never knew." "And the blue box in the workshop?" Margaret found it exactly where Walter had described. Inside was a letter to her, written years earlier, explaining his finances, his wishes for his funeral, and 57 reasons why he'd loved being married to her, one for each rose bush. Jake provided me with copies of the patient care report, the time of death documentation, and a written statement from Margaret Chin confirming the details Walter had shared. He also included photos of the rose garden, 57 rose bushes, carefully tended over decades of marriage. Jake still drives ambulances for Seattle Fire Department, but he says he always feels like someone might be sitting in that back seat, waiting to share one last message before they go. Sometimes, it seems, love is so strong that it lets us pause on our way to whatever comes next, just long enough to say goodbye properly. This next story comes from Marcus, who worked as a night orderly at a regional medical center in Pennsylvania. Marcus's job involved transporting patients, moving equipment, and handling various tasks that kept the hospital running during overnight hours. The medical center was a 7-story building, with patient floors on levels 2 through 6. The basement housed the morgue, storage, and mechanical systems. The 7th floor was administrative offices, mostly empty at night. Marcus had been working nights for about 8 months when he started noticing something odd about elevator number 3. The hospital had 4 elevators, but elevator 3 had developed a peculiar habit. During night shifts, it would frequently stop at the 7th floor on its own, despite no one calling for it. The doors would open, remain open for exactly 30 seconds, then close and return to whatever floor it had been summoned to. Marcus initially assumed it was a mechanical issue and reported it to maintenance several times. The technicians could never find anything wrong with it. The elevator functioned perfectly during the day. The problem only occurred during night shifts, typically between midnight and 4 a.m. After a few weeks of this, Marcus started paying closer attention to elevator 3's behavior. He noticed that it didn't stop at the 7th floor randomly. It only happened when the elevator was transporting patients who had died during the night shift. When Marcus was moving a deceased patient from a room to the morgue, elevator 3 would make its unauthorized stop at the 7th floor. When he was transporting living patients or equipment, the elevator functioned normally. Marcus mentioned this to other night staff, and several nurses confirmed they'd noticed the same pattern. But everyone just wrote it off as a coincidence or a quirky mechanical issue. That changed on a Thursday night in February. Marcus was transporting Mrs. Rodriguez, an elderly patient who had passed away from complications following heart surgery. As usual, when he pressed the basement button to take her to the morgue, the elevator stopped at the 7th floor. But this time, when the doors opened, Marcus saw someone standing in the hallway. It was an elderly man in a hospital gown, standing with his back to the elevator. Marcus called out, "Sir, are you okay? You shouldn't be up here at night." The man turned around, and Marcus immediately recognized him. It was Mr. Patterson, a patient who had died 3 weeks earlier. Marcus had transported Mr. Patterson's body to the morgue himself. Mr. Patterson looked exactly as he had in life, but there was something different about his appearance. He seemed clearer somehow, more present than the frail, sick man Marcus remembered from his final days. "Thank you for being so gentle with us," Mr. Patterson said. "We appreciate the dignity you show." Marcus stood frozen in the elevator, unsure if he was hallucinating or having some kind of breakdown. But Mrs. Rodriguez's body was right there beside him, and this was definitely happening. Marcus managed to ask. Mr. Patterson smiled and gestured down the hallway. For the first time, Marcus looked beyond Mr. Patterson and saw others. Dozens of people in hospital gowns, all ages, all standing peacefully in the 7th floor hallway. Marcus recognized several faces, patients he had transported to the morgue over the previous months. "We wait here," Mr. Patterson explained. "Before we move on, it's peaceful on the 7th floor, quiet, and we wanted to thank the people who cared for us." The elevator doors began to close. Marcus reached for the button to hold them open, but Mr. Patterson held up his hand. "Take care of Mrs. Rodriguez," he said. "She's ready to join us now. And Marcus, thank you for treating us like people, not just bodies. That means more than you know." The doors closed, and the elevator continued to the basement. Marcus completed his task in the morgue, but he couldn't stop thinking about what he'd seen. When he returned upstairs, he immediately took elevator 3 to the 7th floor to investigate. The hallway was empty and dark, but it didn't feel empty, if that makes sense. It felt inhabited. Marcus started asking other night staff about the 7th floor. What he learned made his experience even more unsettling. The 7th floor had originally been patient rooms when the hospital first opened in 1965. But in 1978, following a series of unexplained deaths and patients' complaints about disturbing presences, the entire floor was converted to administrative use. The deaths had all occurred in room 717, always during night shifts, always involving patients who were expected to recover. No medical explanation was ever found for these deaths, but they stopped completely once patient care was moved away from the 7th floor. Room 717 was now used for storage, but Marcus learned from security that the motion sensors in that room activated frequently during night shifts, despite no one having access to it. Sarah ran back to the ambulance, where David was already starting the engine. They transported Tyler to the trauma center, and he survived after extensive surgery. Later, Sarah researched the area and found articles about Emily Patterson, age 24, who had died in a single-vehicle accident on Route 219 in March 2019. Her car had gone off the road at mile marker 46 and wasn't discovered for 3 days despite extensive search efforts. Sarah also discovered something that gave her chills. Over the past 3 years, there had been 6 serious accidents on that stretch of Route 219. All 6 victims had been found quickly by first responders, despite being far from the road in difficult terrain. And in every case, the first responders reported being guided to the scene by a helpful young woman who then disappeared before they could get her statement. Sarah provided me with Tyler's patient care report, news articles about Emily Patterson's death, and statements from other EMTs who had experienced the same phenomenon on Route 219. Sometimes, it seems, the urge to help others doesn't end with death. Emily Patterson died alone in the woods, undiscovered until it was too late. But she's made sure that no one else will suffer the same fate on her stretch of highway. She couldn't save herself, but she's saved 6 others. And counting. This third story is the hardest one for me to share, and I'll warn you now that it involves children. If you're sensitive to content involving pediatric patients, you may want to skip ahead to the final story. This comes from Jennifer, a pediatric nurse who worked at a children's hospital in Denver. Jennifer had been working in pediatric care for 12 years, specializing in critical care for seriously ill children. It's one of the most emotionally demanding jobs in healthcare, and Jennifer was exceptionally good at it. The children's hospital where Jennifer worked had a special ward for terminally ill patients, children who were receiving palliative care rather than curative treatment. This ward was designed to be as comfortable and home-like as possible, with family sleeping areas, play spaces, and a staff trained specifically in end-of-life care for children. Jennifer often worked the night shift in this ward, from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. Night shifts in pediatric palliative care are unique. They're quieter, more peaceful, but also heavy with the weight of families spending what might be their final nights with their children. In the spring of last year, Jennifer was caring for a 7-year-old boy named Tommy who was in the final stages of leukemia. Tommy had been in the hospital for several weeks, and Jennifer had become very attached to him. He was brave, funny, and despite his illness, he always tried to cheer up the other children in the ward. Tommy's room was at the end of the hall, room 314. Across the hall in room 313 was Emma, a 5-year-old girl with a rare genetic condition. The 2 children had become friends, and their families had grown close during their parallel journeys. On a Tuesday night in April, Tommy passed away peacefully in his sleep around 2:30 a.m. His family was with him, and Jennifer was there to help them through those final moments. It was heartbreaking, but as peaceful as such a situation could be. Long pause, then 2 beeps. Okay, stay where you are. Officers are on their way. Is the person who might hurt you in the same room as you right now? 1 for yes, 2 for no. Instead of beeps, Rachel heard something that made her blood run cold. A child's voice, very faint, as if coming from far away. "Mommy, why won't you answer me?" Rachel felt her heart race. "Hello? Is there a child there? If you can hear me, I need you to respond." "Mommy, you're scaring me. Why are you just standing there?" Rachel could hear footsteps, small ones, like a child walking around. "Mommy, there are people at the door. Should I let them in?" Rachel immediately radioed the responding officers. "Unit 12, approach with extreme caution. We have a child at the residence, adult caller unable to speak, possible domestic situation in progress." Through the phone, Rachel could hear knocking and police officers identifying themselves. Then she heard the child's voice again. "Mommy, the police want to come in. Why won't you move?" Rachel heard the front door open and officers entering the house. "Unit 12, we're inside the residence," came the radio call. "We have a situation here. Requesting detective unit and coroner." Rachel's heart sank. In domestic violence situations, calls for the coroner usually meant they were too late. But what the officers found was far more disturbing than a typical domestic violence case. They found a woman standing in the middle of the living room, completely motionless, staring straight ahead. She was alive, breathing, but completely unresponsive to any stimulus. No injuries, no signs of struggle, no indication of what had caused her catatonic state. More importantly, there was no child in the house. The woman was identified as Jennifer Walsh, a single mother who lived alone. According to neighbors, she had a 4-year-old daughter named Emma, but Emma had died in a car accident 6 months earlier. Jennifer's eyes filled with tears. These were not the words of a 5-year-old trying to process loss. Emma was describing something she believed she had actually experienced. Over the following nights, Emma continued to mention visits from Tommy. But she wasn't the only one. Other children in the ward began reporting similar experiences. Kids who had been patients there for weeks or months started talking about friends they were playing with, children that the staff recognized as former patients who had passed away. The descriptions were always the same. The children were healthy and happy. They were playing in a special version of the playroom that was brighter and more wonderful than the real one. And there was a kind woman watching over all of them. Jennifer started paying closer attention to these reports. She documented what the children told her and compared their descriptions. The consistency was remarkable. They all described the same woman, middle-aged, with graying hair and a warm smile, wearing a white dress rather than medical scrubs. None of the current patients had ever met this woman, but their descriptions were identical. Jennifer researched the hospital's history and made a discovery that gave her chills. From 1987 to 2003, the pediatric palliative care ward had been overseen by a nurse named Margaret Sullivan. Nurse Sullivan was legendary among the staff. She had dedicated her entire career to caring for terminally ill children and was beloved by patients and families alike. Margaret Sullivan had died suddenly in 2003 of a heart attack while working a night shift in the same ward where Jennifer now worked. She was found at her desk in the morning, and according to the reports, she appeared peaceful, as if she had simply gone to sleep. The phone was a toy phone, a plastic children's play phone that wasn't connected to any phone line. Rachel provided me with the call logs, police reports, medical records, and photos of the toy phone. She also sent me the audio recording of Emma's voice from the 911 call. The audio analysis confirmed that the voice belonged to a young child, approximately 4 years old, speaking with the vocabulary and speech patterns consistent with that age. But Emma Walsh had been dead for 6 months. Rachel believes that Emma was trying to get help for her mother, who had become lost in grief and was slowly fading away from reality. The 911 call might have saved Jennifer's life. She received the psychological help she needed and has slowly begun to recover. Sometimes, it seems, love transcends death. And sometimes, a child's concern for their parent is strong enough to reach across the divide between worlds to ask for help. Emma just wanted someone to take care of her mommy when she couldn't anymore. This final story comes from Dr. Sarah Kim, an emergency room physician at a trauma center in Atlanta. Dr. Kim has been working in emergency medicine for 8 years, and she's accustomed to high-stress situations, life or death decisions, and the adrenaline-fueled environment of a busy ER. But what she experienced during a particularly intense night shift last summer challenged everything she thought she knew about life and death. It was a Saturday night in July, the kind of night that ER staff dread: hot weather, full moon, and a steady stream of trauma cases. Dr. Kim was working a 12-hour shift that started at 7 p.m., and by midnight, the ER was at capacity with multiple critical patients. Around 1:30 a.m., paramedics brought in a young man named David who had been in a severe motorcycle accident. David was unconscious, with multiple traumatic injuries, including a serious head trauma. The paramedics had managed to stabilize him enough for transport, but his condition was critical. Dr. Kim was the attending physician for David's case. As the trauma team worked to assess and treat his injuries, it became clear that David's situation was extremely grave. His brain scans showed massive swelling, and despite their best efforts, his vital signs were deteriorating rapidly. David's girlfriend, Maria, had arrived at the hospital and was waiting in the family conference room. She was distraught, as any loved one would be, but she kept insisting that she needed to see David immediately. "He's trying to tell me something," she told Dr. Kim. "I can hear him calling my name. Please, I need to see him." Hospital policy typically limits family access during active trauma treatment, but Dr. Kim could see that Maria was genuinely distressed in a way that went beyond normal worry. Against protocol, she allowed Maria to briefly visit David in the trauma bay. Marcus made a note to dispatch a rescue boat to 847 Riverside Drive as soon as one became available. But something about the call bothered him. If the area was under 8 feet of water, how was a landline still working? "Mrs. Williams, I want you to stay calm. Help is coming. Can you tell me exactly what you can see from your window?" "Just water everywhere. The Hendersons' house next door. I can only see their roof now. And the Patel family across the street. Their whole house is underwater except for the very top." Marcus continued taking calls throughout the night, but he kept thinking about Dorothy and Robert Williams. When a rescue boat finally became available at dawn, he specifically requested that they check 847 Riverside Drive first. 2 hours later, the rescue team radioed back with information that made Marcus question everything he thought he understood. "Dispatch, we're at 847 Riverside Drive. The house is completely underwater, has been for at least 12 hours based on water damage patterns. We checked the second floor, it's flooded up to the ceiling. No one could have survived in this house." Marcus felt confused. "Did you check thoroughly? We had a caller reporting they were trapped on the second floor." "Negative, dispatch. The second floor is completely submerged. We also checked the neighboring houses the caller mentioned, 845 and 849 Riverside. Both houses have been underwater for hours. No survivors at any of these addresses." But Marcus had spoken to Dorothy Williams for over an hour throughout the night. She had called back 3 more times, providing updates on their condition and asking about rescue estimates. Marcus pulled the call logs and traced the phone number. The landline belonged to Robert and Dorothy Williams at 847 Riverside Drive. But according to utility company records, that phone line had been severed by flood damage at 2 a.m., 2.5 hours before Marcus received the first call. Mike felt confused. "Derek, when did you tell me to check on her? You've been unconscious this entire time." "I don't know. I remember being somewhere else, like I was floating above everything. I could see myself in the ambulance with you, and I could see Melissa in her room, not moving. I was trying to tell you, trying to make you understand. Was I dead?" "Your heart stopped for about 90 seconds, Lisa said. "But we got you back." During the near-death experience, Derek had apparently been aware of both his own situation and Melissa's. He'd tried to communicate with Mike, urging him to check on her. At the hospital, Derek's story was confirmed. The police investigation revealed that Derek and Melissa had purchased what they thought was heroin from a dealer outside the casino. It turned out to be fentanyl laced with carfentanil, an elephant tranquilizer that's 50 times stronger than fentanyl itself. Derek had taken enough to nearly kill him. Melissa had taken twice as much. By the time security found her, she'd been dead for over an hour. But here's what still haunts Mike. The police checked the timeline carefully. Melissa died around 3:45 a.m. Mike received the dispatch call for Derek at 4:17 a.m. But hotel cameras showed that no one entered or left Melissa's room between 3 a.m. and when security forced entry at 4:45 a.m. There was no way Derek could have known Melissa was in trouble. He was already unconscious in his own room when she died. Yet somehow, during the minutes when his heart had stopped, Derek had been aware of Melissa's death and had desperately tried to get help for her. Derek survived and went through treatment for addiction. He also contacted Melissa's family and set up a fund for her 4-year-old daughter. He told Mike later that he feels responsible for Melissa's death. If he hadn't suggested they buy drugs that night, she'd still be alive. But the most unsettling discovery came when Dr. Kim reviewed the security footage from that night. The cameras clearly showed the automatic doors opening and closing with no visible cause. But in the split second before the doors opened, there appeared to be two translucent figures near David's bedside. One shorter figure that seemed to be supported by a taller figure in what looked like military fatigues. The image was brief and unclear, but it was definitely there on the recording. Dr. Kim provided me with copies of the security footage, the door access logs, David's medical records, and military records for Sergeant Torres. She also included statements from other staff members who witnessed the unexplained door activation. In the emergency room, doctors fight death every day. They see miracles and tragedies in equal measure. But sometimes, Dr. Kim learned, death isn't the enemy. Sometimes it's a reunion. And sometimes, love transcends even the finality of death, ensuring that no one has to face the unknown alone.